Number 3. Jeremy Bright. Jeremy Bright was born on May 25, 1972, in Myrtle Point, Oregon. He lived his childhood in Myrtle Point, but then in 1971, when he was 13, his mother and stepfather got divorced. Jeremy and his younger sister, Esty, moved with her mother to Grants Pass, Oregon, which is about 100 miles from Myrtle Point. At the age of 14, Jeremy was shaping up to be a large man. He was 6'1", and he wore size 13 shoes. Jeremy loved basketball, and he was a great player. The summer of 1972 would be the first away from all his friends in Myrtle Point. His stepfather suggested that he and Esty come stay with him during the annual Coos County Fair. Their mother was working and attending school, and she thought it would be a nice vacation for them, so she agreed to let them go. Jeremy and Esty loved the fair, and they were looking forward to spending time there. On Wednesday, August 16th, 14-year-old Jeremy went to the fair with his friend, Johnny Fish. Later that day, Jeremy called his mother from a payphone. She told him that on Saturday, she would pick him and his sister up and bring them home. Then later that night, Jeremy went to a tavern that was owned by his grandmother. His stepfather and several family members were in the tavern. Jeremy got some money, and then he left the tavern. The next day, Jeremy went to the fair again. This time, he went with his 9-year-old sister, Esty. At 2 p.m. they split up, and they were supposed to meet at 5 p.m. at the Ferris wheel. At 5 o'clock, Esty was at the Ferris wheel, but Jeremy didn't show up. She just thought that he forgot, so she went back to her stepfather's house alone. The next day, no one saw Jeremy. The day after that, which was Saturday, Jeremy's mother, Diane Beatty, arrived in Myrtle Point to pick up her kids. That's when they realized that Jeremy was missing. The last time any adults saw him was on Wednesday night, when he stopped in at the tavern. The last time Esty saw him was Thursday at about 2 p.m. at the fair. She saw him talking to 2 guys that she didn't know. That Saturday, Jeremy's friends and family looked for him, but they couldn't find any trace of him. That evening, they filed a missing persons report. At first, the police thought he was just a runaway. Jeremy was supposed to start high school in a few weeks, and he was anxious about it. So the police just assumed he ran away to avoid going to a high school in a city that was 100 miles from his hometown and all of his friends. They thought when the fair left town, Jeremy might have joined them. However, Jeremy's family said he wasn't the type to run away. Also, he left behind his wallet, his keys, and his brand new watch. After he went missing, rumors started to swirl around Myrtle Point, which only had a population of 2,500 people. One rumor was that on the day he went missing, Jeremy was at a party and he drank a beer laced with a drug. He had an adverse reaction to the drug and he died. The people at the party then hid his body. Another rumor, which came from an unidentified prison inmate, is that Jeremy was at a swimming hole with a group of people and he was accidentally shot. The group tried to give him CPR in the cabin near the swimming hole, but he died, so they buried him. The police went to the swimming hole and they found a cabin nearby. However, they never found evidence that Jeremy was ever there, and they found no evidence that a body was buried in the area. Eventually, the police did develop a person of interest. On the last day that Jeremy was seen alive, witnesses saw him in the passenger seat of a vehicle in the fair's parking lot. In the driver's seat was the owner of the vehicle, 22-year-old Terry Lee Steinhoff. Steinhoff, who was a mill worker, used to babysit Jeremy. On September 7, 1988, just 2 years after Jeremy went missing, Steinhoff was arrested for murder. On May 14th, 4 months earlier, Steinhoff went to a bar in Bunker Hill, Oregon. At the bar, he met 32-year-old mother of two, Patricia Lynn Morris. The next day, Morris was found dead in a bush that was located between her home and the bar. She had been stabbed 15 times in the chest, neck, and face. The police found evidence that proved Steinhoff was the person who killed her, and he was arrested in September 1988. In January 1989, 6 days after the television program Unsolved Mysteries aired a segment about Jeremy Bright's disappearance, Steinhoff pleaded guilty to Morris's murder. He was sentenced to a minimum of 10 years in prison. Detectives visited Steinhoff in prison several times, and each time they asked about Jeremy's disappearance, but Steinhoff refused to cooperate. In October 2007, Steinhoff died in prison after overdosing on heroin. Sadly, anything he possibly knew about Jeremy Bright's disappearance died with him. The police were hoping after he died, people who knew about his involvement in Jeremy's disappearance would come forward. Unfortunately, in the 10 years after Steinhoff's death, no one has come forward. The police have searched areas where Steinhoff lived and even drained a pond, but no trace of Jeremy has ever been found. Jeremy's family believes he is dead, and in 2011, they held a remembrance ceremony for him. They are hoping that one day they will find out what happened to him so they can move on with their lives. Number 2. Kim Amero. The first week of September 1985 was a big week for Kim Amero, who lived in St. John, New Brunswick, Canada. She was starting the 10th grade, and on September 3rd, she was turning 15. 2 days before her birthday, Kim, her younger sister, and 2 of her friends attended the St. John exhibition, which is an annual fair. Her sister had been grounded, but her parents allowed her to attend the fair as long as she came home before the fireworks. Before the fireworks started, Kim walked her sister to the bus, and then she went back to watch the fireworks with her 2 friends. At some point in the night, Kim walked away from her friends and never returned to them. Later that night, Kim wasn't home, and one of her friends called her house looking for her. The phone call worried her mother, and she reported Kim missing. At first, the police thought that Kim was a runaway. Kim had run away before, and she always came home. Also, several of Kim's friends said she had plans to run away. When she didn't return home after a few days, her family became even more alarmed. Then the police began to take the disappearance seriously. But sadly, years went by and no trace of Kim was found. Then in 1998, a suspect in her disappearance emerged. On March 1st, 1998, a man walked into the police station in Moncton, New Brunswick. He told the police he had watched his friend commit a murder. He then led the police to a basement apartment in Moncton. Inside, they found the resident of the apartment, 48-year-old Joan Hicks. She was lying in a pool of her own blood. She had been strangled and her throat had been slit with a serrated knife. She did not show signs of sexual assault. It appeared that Joan's 11-year-old daughter, Nina, was missing. The police searched the apartment, and they found Nina's dead body hanging in the closet of a bedroom. She probably had been smothered or strangled to death before she was hung up in the closet among the clothes. The man who came into the police station said that the killer was 34-year-old Michael Way McRae. The police immediately drove over to McRae's home and arrested him. McRae was born in 1965 in Ontario, but when he was young, he moved to Argyll, Nova Scotia. Throughout his childhood, he was in and out of reform schools. When he was in his early teens, he got kicked out of his father's home and he became a drifter. As an adult, he did several stints in prison, mostly for robbery. Since McRae was a drifter, after he was arrested for the murder of Joan and Nina Hicks, police forces across Canada began to look to see if they could connect him to any unsolved crimes. A year and a half after the murder of Joan and Nina, McRae had accumulated 3 more murder charges. Just before McRae went to trial, it was announced that he made a plea deal. McRae said he would confess to the murders he committed, but he didn't want any of his accomplices charged, and he wanted help to control what he called his demons. He then admitted to committing 4 of the 5 murders he was charged with. He said on February 28, 1998, he and his friend were doing cocaine. He and his girlfriend got into a fight, and she went to Joan Hicks's apartment. Him and his friend continued doing cocaine. Later that night, McRae said that he wanted to kill someone. He said he didn't care who he killed, he said he just needed to kill someone. McRae said that he and his friend went to Joan's apartment and he ordered his girlfriend to go home. She got in a cab and left. Joan was left alone with McRae and his friend in her apartment. Then McRae attacked her and choked her. When she lost consciousness, he grabbed a knife from the kitchen and slit her throat. McRae said that he didn't kill Nina. Instead, he said his friend did it. McRae then said that 8 years before he killed Joan, on March 30th, 1991, he was on a 3-day parole from prison and he was in Montreal, Quebec. He said he felt the urge to kill and he decided to kill a gay man. That night, he went to a bar in Montreal's gay village and he met 59-year-old Robert Astley. They talked about hockey over some drinks, and then Astley asked him to come back to his apartment for some wine. McRae ended up falling asleep on his couch. The next morning, he heard Astley getting dressed. McRae hit him in the head with a lamp, and then he stabbed him 16 times in the chest, neck, and head. The only thing he took from the apartment was a bottle of wine. That night, McRae went out again in the gay village. He then went home with 45-year-old Gaetan Etier. When they got back to 8 Year's apartment, he fell asleep on a fold-out bed, and McRae watched him sleep all night. At about 6 a.m., McRae picked up a beer bottle and smashed it into Etier's face while he was still sleeping. He then stabbed him several times. Once again, the only thing he took was a bottle of wine. On November 14, 1987, about 3.5 years before he killed the 2 men in Montreal, McRae was involved in a robbery in St. John, New Brunswick. He and 2 friends, Norm Warren and Mark Daniel Gibbons, tried to rob a taxi driver. During the robbery, Gibbons ended up stabbing the cab driver to death. The trio then ran to a side street. McRae became angry at Gibbons for botching the robbery, so he stabbed him several times. Severely injured, Gibbons went looking for help, but he couldn't find any. He was found dead a few hours after he killed the cab driver. McRae and Warren were arrested for the robbery and for Gibbons' murder. McRae told the police that Warren killed Gibbons. McRae ended up testifying against Warren when he went to trial for Gibbons' murder. Warren was ultimately acquitted of murder, but he was sentenced to 11 years in prison for armed robbery. McRae, who was the one who killed Gibbons, was sentenced to 5 years for his role in the robbery and the murder of the taxi driver. In 1999, even though he said he didn't kill Nina, McGray ended up pleading guilty to her murder, along with the murder of her mother. He was given 2 life sentences to run concurrently. After he was sentenced, McGray told his lawyer that his real body count was 16. The police interviewed him, and they asked him who his first victim was. He said that on April 24, 1975, when he was 19 years old, he was driving his truck with a friend in the passenger seat near Weymouth, Nova Scotia. They happened upon 17-year-old Elizabeth Gale Tucker hitchhiking on the side of the road. They picked her up and drove toward Digby, Nova Scotia. McGray demanded oral sex for the ride, and Elizabeth refused. McGray pulled over beside a field and dragged Elizabeth out of the truck. He then attempted to rape her, but he couldn't. So he took out his knife and stabbed her to death. He and his friend then dragged her body into the woods. Her body was found 6 months later. McGray never identified his friend. McGray also confessed to killing Kim Amero. Kim went missing about 4 months after McGray killed Elizabeth Gale Tucker. Digby, where Elizabeth was killed, is just across the Bay of Fundy from St. John, where Kim went missing. It is a 3-hour trip on the ferry. Also, in 1981, when McGray killed Mark Daniel Gibbons, his accomplice in the taxi robbery, they were in St. John. McGray told the police that he killed Kim and buried her in the Kingston Peninsula, which is in southern New Brunswick. The police searched the area, but they found no trace of Kim. The police are unsure if McGray is being honest about killing 16 people or if he is just making it up. They can only link him to the 6 murders that he was convicted of. If McGray did kill 16 people, that would make him Canada's most prolific serial killer. In 2000, McGray pleaded guilty to the murders of Elizabeth Gale Tucker, Mark Daniel Gibbons, Robert Astley, and Gaetan Etier. He was given 4 life sentences to run concurrently with the 2 life sentences he was serving for the murders of Joan and Nina Hicks. After he was sentenced, McGray told a reporter that unless he got mental help, he would hurt someone else, even if he was in prison. In 2010, he was being held in the Mountain Institution, which is a medium security prison in Agassiz, British Columbia. On November 21, 2010, his cellmate, 33-year-old Jeremy Phillips, was found dead in their cell. McGray had strangled him to death. Phillips, who had served 6.5 years for assault, was about to be released on parole. McGray was then transferred to Canada's highest security prison, the Saint-Anne-des-Plaines Institution, which is northwest of Montreal, Quebec. He pleaded guilty to killing Phillips, and he was given another life sentence. At the time of this video, it's not known if McGray was responsible for Kim's disappearance or if he was just lying when he confessed. Then in 2009, 24 years after Kim Amero went missing, the case took an unusual turn. A high school where Kim's cousins attended school received a letter about Kim. The writer claimed to be psychic, and he wrote, thanks to a vision, he knew what happened to Kim. He said that Kim was buried near a wooden cabin near Upham, New Brunswick. The writer then called Kim's siblings and told them that they could find some audio cassettes buried on the fairgrounds where Kim was last seen. The siblings went to the fairgrounds and they found the tapes. They turned the tapes over to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The tapes were audio recordings of a man speaking. On the tapes, the man said that 5 weeks after Kim went missing, he was hunting about 35 miles away from St. John in Upham, and he heard a girl scream. But he didn't really investigate the scream. He said that the scream bothered him for days. He then suspected that the scream could have been Kim. Specifically, he thought she was screaming because she was being killed. He went back to the area and he had a psychic vision. He said the vision showed him where Kim was buried. On the tape, he gave directions to where Kim was buried. The police and Kim's siblings went to the area where the man said Kim was buried, and they found nothing. The police and Kim's siblings didn't know who recorded the tapes. A few months after finding the cassettes, Kim's siblings were going door to door in Upham to see if anyone had any information about her disappearance. Then they knocked on the door of a man who said he had been waiting to talk to someone about Kim for years. He said that a few years earlier he was having a coffee at a local truck stop and he was talking about doing some hunting in Upham. Suddenly, another man at the truck stop spoke up and he said, "Isn't that where that missing girl, Kim Amero, went in and never came out?" The comment unsettled the man enough that he went out to his truck and wrote down the man's name. He then kept a piece of paper with the man's name written on it in his glove compartment for years. The Amero siblings recognized the name and they knew the man's daughter. They had the man's daughter listen to the tapes and she said that it was her father's voice. When Kim went missing, the man, who was never identified, lived across the road from the fairgrounds. 24 years later, when the Amero siblings found the cassettes, he was living in the same house. In fact, from his house, he would have been able to watch the Amero siblings look for the cassettes. Also, Kim knew the man. The summer before she disappeared, she had babysat the man's children. Finally, the man is a convicted sex offender. The man has never been charged in connection with Kim's disappearance. Kim Amero's siblings are still actively looking for her, and they hope that one day they'll be able to find out what happened to her. Number 1. The Rodeo Murders. In the summer of 1974, 19-year-old Christy Gross, who lived in Bodle, South Dakota, was visiting her 19-year-old friend, Charlene Brown, who lived in Rawlins, Wyoming. Rawlins is a small city with a population of about 8,000 people. On July 4th, Gross and Brown went to the Little Britches Rodeo, which was an annual event in the small city. Then they seemingly vanished into thin air. They were reported missing and searches were conducted, but the two 19-year-olds were nowhere to be found. A month later, on August 4th, 15-year-old Deborah Meyer left her home in Rawlins to go to a nearby movie theater. She too vanished without a trace. 19 days after Deborah vanished, 10-year-old Jaylene Baker was attending the Carbon County Fair, which is held every year at the Rawlins Fairgrounds. Jaylene was watching the rodeo with her friends, and then she wandered away from them. When her friends went to find her, they couldn't. They called her parents to see if she left the fair without telling anyone, but she hadn't come home. Her parents immediately reported her missing. Massive searches of the area were conducted, but just like Christy Gross, Charlene Brown, and Deborah Meyer, no trace of Jaylene could be found. The residents of Rawlins were in a panic. In the span of 50 days, 4 young females went missing from the small city. It was thought the cases were connected, but the police couldn't be certain. They weren't sure if the young women had run away or if they had been kidnapped. On April 24, 1975, about 8 months after Jaylene went missing, a man was walking his dog near gravel pits that are 2 miles southwest of Rawlins. He found Jaylene's decomposing body lying face down in some brush. She was only wearing a shirt, socks, and a pair of tennis shoes. She was killed by a single blow to the head with a heavy blunt object. Unfortunately, locating her body didn't help the police find a suspect. It wasn't long before the investigation of the 3 disappearances and the murder of Jaylene Banker went cold. The cases in Rollins have a striking resemblance to another series of crimes that happened 9 years later and over 850 miles away. It all started on September 26, 1981. It was a hot night in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. That evening, 13-year-old friends Charlotte Kinsey and Cinda Pallett went with 2 boys to the Oklahoma State Fair. At around 7 p.m., they called their parents and told them that they were offered money to help unload plush toys that were used as prizes at the fair. They said they'd call later for a ride. But Charlotte and Cinda didn't call, and they didn't come home. Their parents reported them missing that night. The police talked to the boys who were with them at the fair. The boys said that the 4 of them were on the midway when a man wearing a yellow name badge asked them if they wanted a job. He then got the 4 of them into a car and he drove them to a truck stop where they were supposed to unload the plush toys from a truck. But there was no truck when they got there. The man gave each boy $10 and told them to get out and wait at the truck stop. He said he was going to get the truck and he'd come back in a few minutes. He then drove off with Charlotte and Cinda. They waited for some time, but the man never showed up with the truck. The police thought that the boys were credible. Just to be sure, the boys were separated and they were both asked to describe the man to a police sketch artist. Their sketches were nearly identical. They said he was a white man with a beard, he was possibly in his 40s or 50s, and he wore Western clothing. The police checked with the fair and found out that none of the employees wore yellow name badges. The police concluded that the man posed as a fair worker to lure the girls away from the midway. Shortly after the girls were kidnapped, some boys found a yellow name badge on the midway and they turned it over to the police. The badge said the man's name was Don Corey and there was a picture of Corey on the badge. Corey looked a lot like the man the boys described. The police learned that the name badge came from another fair and Corey was a real person who worked as a traveling carnival worker. An arrest warrant was issued for Corey, but since he was a traveling carnival worker, he was hard to track down. 3 days after Charlotte and Cinda went missing, 16-year-old Susan Thompson and 15-year-old Cheryl Vaughn told their parents they were going to the Oklahoma State Fair. When they didn't come home that night, their parents reported them missing. The police tracked the girls' last whereabouts, and they weren't sure if the girls made it to the fair. Instead, it's believed that they went to a nightclub in Oklahoma City. Their car was found abandoned about 15 miles east of the club, near Interstate 240. Nothing was wrong with the car, and the keys were in the ignition. But as to what happened to Susan and Cheryl is a mystery. 3 days after they went missing, Don Corey was arrested in Greenville, Alabama. But 6 days later, he was released, and the charges against him were dropped. Corey was able to prove that he was working at a fair in Texas on the night that Charlotte and Cinda went missing. For the next 2 years, the investigations into the 7 disappearances and 1 murder were at a standstill. On October 27, 1983, the skeletal remains of a female were found about 2 miles outside of St. Clair, Wyoming. St. Clair is about 10 miles east of Rollins, where 4 females went missing over the course of 50 days, 8 years earlier. The remains were identified as 19-year-old Christy Gross, who, along with her friend Charlene Brown, went missing from the Low Bridges Rodeo on July 4, 1974. The area was searched for Charlene Brown's remains, but nothing was found. Gross died from blunt force trauma to the head. 10-year-old Jaylene Banker, who went missing 50 days after Gross and Brown had vanished, was killed the same way. The difference was that Gross was hit twice with a blunt instrument and Jaylene was struck once. Also, both of their remains were found in remote areas 2 miles southwest of a city. Unfortunately, the discovery of Gross's remains didn't lead to any progress on the cases. Late on the night of September 19, 1984, 11 months after Gross's body was found, a call came into the police in Evansville, Wyoming. The caller said he was in his house when he heard a loud pounding at his front door. He opened the door and in his doorway, he found a half-nude teenage girl whose wrists and ankles were bound. The girl said that his neighbor had kidnapped her and her friend. Her friend was still in the kidnapper's house. But as the girl and the man who called 911 waited for the police, they heard a car speed off into the darkness of the night. When the police arrived, they went to the home where the kidnapper lived. Unfortunately, it was too late. He was gone. The girl's friend, 13-year-old Sharon Baldeagle, was also gone. The neighbor identified the kidnapper as 49-year-old Royal Russell Long. Long was a long-haul trucker who had a history of being violent with women. The 16-year-old girl who escaped from Long's house explained that earlier that day, she and Sharon ran away from their homes in Eagle Butte, South Dakota. At about 1 o'clock that afternoon, they were hitchhiking in Casper, Wyoming, and they were picked up by Long. Long took them back to his house so they could eat and shower. After they ate, Long offered them $100 in exchange for sexual favors, and the girls turned him down. He snapped and started beating them. Using coat hangers, he bound their wrists and their ankles. He then sexually assaulted Sharon. Afterward, he fell asleep, and that's when the 16-year-old escaped. Long became a wanted man, and he stayed on the lam for about a week. Then he was arrested in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Sharon Baldeagle was not with him. He was then transported back to Wyoming. The police told him that they assumed that he had killed Sharon, and they wanted to know where her body was located. Long said he didn't kill her. He said they dropped her off in Cheyenne, Wyoming, where she either got on a bus or into a truck that was heading to Dallas, Texas. The police didn't believe him, and they were sure Sharon was dead. Sharon's family, on the other hand, believed she was still alive. Without a body and the victim's family believing that she was still alive, the district attorney's office was not confident that they would be able to convict Long of Sharon's murder. Instead of charging Long with murder, in January 1985, he pleaded guilty to 2 counts of kidnapping, and he was given 2 life sentences. Long had a daughter, and his daughter said that when she was young, he sexually abused her for years. She also said she used to go with her father when he drove on some of his long hauls. She said that on a few of these trips, she witnessed her father try to lure several girls into the cab of his truck. Often, he used stuffed animals to lure the girls. Also, he liked to target fairs and carnivals. After Long was arrested, police departments around the United States started to examine some of their cold cases to see if Long could have been the killer. 2 police departments that took a significant interest in Long were the Rawlins Police Department and the Oklahoma City Police Department. Long was a trucker, and he lived in Evansville, Wyoming, which is about 125 miles from Rawlins, where 4 young females went missing in the summer of 1975. 2 of the victims were found, and both died from blunt force trauma to the head. Christy Gross's remains were found just outside of Sinclair, Wyoming. While it's not the most direct route, while driving to Rawlins-Savinsville, you drive past Sinclair. Long lived in Wyoming, but in September 1984, when 13-year-old Charlotte Kinsey and Cinda Pallett, and 16-year-old Susan Thompson, and 15-year-old Cheryl Vaughn went missing from Oklahoma City, Long was living in Oklahoma City. In fact, Long admitted that he was at the Oklahoma State Fair on the night that Charlotte and Cinda vanished. But he said he never met the girls, and he didn't know what happened to them. After Long was arrested, the boys who were with Charlotte and Cinda on the night they went missing identified Long as the man who offered them jobs unloading stuffed animals. The police even know that Long looked like Don Corey, whose name tag was used by the man who kidnapped Charlotte and Cinda. The police inspected Long's car, and they sprayed luminol on a mat. The luminol lit up, and it showed the silhouettes of two young girls' bodies. The police also found blonde hairs in the car and in Long's house. An expert said they were probably Charlotte's hairs. Long also knew how to get rid of bodies. He was a trained meat cutter. He supposedly told another inmate that if you cut up a body enough, you can shove the parts into rat holes. The district attorney's office felt that they had enough evidence to charge Long with the murders of Charlotte and Cinda. In October 1985, the evidence was presented in a preliminary hearing. The judge ruled some key pieces of evidence were inadmissible. The judge then dismissed the charges against Long, citing that there wasn't enough evidence to go to trial. Long was never charged again in connection with the murders of Charlotte and Cinda, nor was he charged in connection with the other 4 disappearances and 2 murders. In November 1993, at the age of 58, while serving his life sentences for kidnapping Sharon Valdeagle and her friend, Long died of natural causes. Long never admitted to killing anyone, and he never revealed the whereabouts of the remains of any of his suspected victims. Longstar believes it's possible that he has hundreds of victims all over the United States. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you found that interesting. If you did, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe for more videos just like it. Also, don't forget to go criminallist.com where you can suggest cases, buy merch, and find out about an exclusive podcast. Well, that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.